In the last lecture module, I talked a little bit about the historical origins of scholasticism. I talked a little bit about its methodological precepts. I talked a little bit about its ideology. And then we started shifting over to the worldview that starts to emerge at the beginning of the European Renaissance, particularly as we see the rise of the scientific revolution. And I want to stop and make note of the real differences in worldviews that these two different historical epochs represent as we start this lecture module. So when we think about scholasticism has a methodology and a means of intellectual inquiry that's largely based upon mastering and refining one's understanding of existent authoritative texts through the process of exegetical dialectic. That is, you attempt to clearly articulate the views within these authoritative texts, to draw out lines of argumentation, to see if there are potential inconsistencies or contradictions within the text or between texts, to try and figure out if there are methods for resolution or ways in which they can be brought into harmony. Now, this is all a very conservative, authoritative, text-based approach to understanding the nature of the world that's quite consistent with the idea of the Roman Catholic Church at this time, where the Roman Catholic Church just makes pronouncements about the nature of God and religious practice and so on. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the ideology of the worldview that's important or that gets developed out of scholasticism. So the scholastics largely take these ideas that they find in Aristotelian texts and commentaries thereon, and they Christianize them. That is, they take those ideas from ancient Greece and they bring them into the worldview of Roman Catholicism. And one of the important things is that Aristotle's physics is largely brought in. We have a geocentric conception of the universe, where the entire universe revolves around the Earth. And this is, of course, completely consistent with both the Greek worldview, which is a humanistic worldview, but also with the Roman Catholic point of view, which has God, the Christian deity, creating the universe essentially as a receptacle for humanity. And so it would be kind of shocking if it wasn't, in fact, geared around, oriented towards humanity. And as we saw, when Copernicus borrows astronomical data from the Islamic astronomers and some ideas from the Islamic astronomers, and he writes his heavenly bodies, articulating a heliocentric view of the nature of the solar system and the cosmos, that's a dramatically different perspective on where human beings are and how they fit into the universe. Instead of being the center of the universe, the point around which everything else is turning, the heliocentric picture of the cosmos has the Earth as just one of many little planets rotating around a sun enmeshed in a larger universe. And now the privileged special position of humanity and of the Earth is vanquished. And this was ideologically difficult for the Roman Catholic religious medieval sentiment to absorb. It required that you think of the Earth as not a special place, but really as a small, relatively insignificant dot in a large cosmos. Now, how did they argue for this? Well, what we saw them do is argue for this largely by observation and by the predictive ability of the theory. It was both simple and highly predictive, and hence it was to be preferred. And so that represents a dramatic shift both in the ideology, that is the cosmology, as well as the methodology, the reasons for why you would accept that as your view about the nature of the world. And similarly, when we see Vasilis, here we start to see this very detailed articulation of human anatomy and physiology. And the more detailed and the more physical and well understood the workings of the human body become, the more at odds they seem to be with this religious, spiritual notion of the nature of humanity as being ensouled, as having an immortal soul. And in fact, with the scholastics, there was this immortal soul that was, as many people will often use the metaphor, like a ghost in the machine. So the human body was just thought of as a physical entity that was somehow bonded to the immortal soul. And it also separates out what makes humans uniquely human from the physical world and even from other animals. And so the idea that human body isn't just a physical machine, but that its processes are actually responsible for much more of what we think of as what makes people human, that begins to challenge this notion that human beings are fundamentally different from the physical world. It begins to demand a fact observation-based explanation of how it is that this immortal soul, this non-physical thing, can somehow act as the God, the ghost inside that machine. And so there is a lot of tension. And what we'll see when we look at Descartes' meditation is he is sympathetic to many of what he perceives to be the ideas and methodologies of the scientific revolution, but at the same time, he still wants to hold on to certain aspects of that scholastic world view. So he'll write on meteors, and he'll do treatises on optics. He'll be interested in physiology. He'll be interested in understanding cosmology, but he won't be willing to go beyond the religious strictures, conventions, ideologies of the time. He's not going to be going that far along that pathway. Someone like Baron de Halbach might be an example of someone who's like that. And we'll pick this up again in our next lecture module.